to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a Baller.
Welcome in. It's hot out there. Wednesday, June 25th here. Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. And it's Borg and Betz here today with you.
It is so hot outside. Literally, I don't understand how people do this on a daily basis. The guys out in Arizona, 100 is normal. Like right now where I live, Kyle, this is with humidity, so of course it's different. But this week's been a scorcher. It's been like 95 3 or 4 days in a row. Like you go outside and you just feel the sweat drip down like the back of your neck, your lower back. We all been there. I was pumping gas today. I'm like within 2 seconds, I could feel the sweat. I was like, what is happening? So yes, it's miserable to go outside, which means that Kyle has just been grinding the tape. He has been in the spreadsheets because now he loves it. He loves being in the AC at his computer, not going outside. And this is a great week to not go outside. Yeah, man, I'm ready to get back to manageable temperatures. I don't know what it is down there where you are, but up here it's been brutal.
Just remember, we're called Hotlanta for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where you are in the world because you're listening all over. But yes, it is very different from where the headquarters of Fantasy Footballers are in Phoenix to the East Coast, which is, having this heat swell right now. But if you're one of the humidity bros or gals out there, you're used to that lifestyle. Like one of our writers and editors, Julia, is actually on the East Coast right now. She's in Boston. And, you think, oh, this is great. I'm in the Northeast. This is fine. I talked to her this morning and it is sweltering out there. So I think at this point in the Dynasty offseason, there are some things that we get to bring up that will get you through the heat of the summer. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking Dynasty bench warfare. That is something we talked about last summer of what do you do with your bench spots? What should you look for? We're going to go through a bunch of different players and see what is the outlook for players at the end of your bench. We know that we can talk about all the elite players, but we want to get down and dirty and talk about the really gross ones out there. And talk about the end of your bench. We'll play a little game called Stash or Trash where Betz and I will basically say you can't cut that guy anyways. So every single person, just keep him on your roster.
It's so funny, man. It's part of the reason I love Dynasty is because you can paint a 5% chance of this thing happening with this one player. And you're like, you know what? Your mouse is hovering over the drop button and you're like, is he the RB3 on this team? Maybe. I don't know. They took him in the second round last year, those kind of guys. It's so fun. But when you hit on those guys or you scoop them off waivers or, whatever, makes you feel like a genius. So that happens probably once every 3 years, 4 years,
yes.
Something like that. But if you can find those guys, then good things happen. Hopefully we can help you do that today. We'll see.
One of my favorite leagues is a Superflex league where I will often, in the dead of the summer where there's not a lot of action, I will pick up random backup quarterbacks, not just good ones, just anybody who's a backup. And it's always met with a response of that is the darkest possible thing that you could bring up right now. Because I'm basically saying I'm picking up this guy as if, the starter's going to get injured. So no matter who it is, that's the goal. So, I've had Joe Milton on a team for about a year. All right. When he got drafted, Bazooka Joe, really fun player. It's great in Superflex. Just say, hey, sit on my team. Maybe we get some goodness. We saw him in week 18. But it's a dark thought when I look at him on my roster and say the only way that you're going to be good is if Dak is hurt.
I mean, hey, man, week 14, week 15, every year, we're starting some random dudes, especially in Superflex leagues. So, yeah, those backup quarterbacks actually do carry not value per se, obviously in trade markets and stuff, but some of those guys are going to start a couple games and you could do worse in your QB2 spot. So, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Milton, like you said, it was one game. It was week 18 against the backups. But he flashed some upside. So, yeah, you could talk me into a stash of Joe Milton. Obviously, he's never touching the field unless an injury, like you said. But like you said, you could do worse in terms of stashes.
Anthony Richardson walked off the field so that Joe Milton could run onto the field. That's my take.
I still cannot believe that happened last year. Goodness.
If you want all of our Dynasty rankings or rookie rankings, startup rankings, and all of our Dynasty blurbs, so every single player in the Ultimate Draft Kit has a Dynasty outlook for that player, talking about contract situations. What do we see over the next couple of years? Even some of the deep sleepers that you're looking at rosters, you can go through and look at the team opportunity reports as well and say, hey, Washington, which we covered, I don't know, a month or two ago, we said Washington basically has nobody under contract in 2026. You're probably going to see some signings soon, but you look at the wide receivers, you look at the running backs, and then you look at the deeper names on the roster, Jalen Lane, JCM at running back, and you say, hey, I could stash these guys. So you can find all of that in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus, ultimatedraftkit.com, if you want to get in on that. A quick question I have for us before we talk about Dynasty benches is a fun one. And I kind of want to nerd out a little bit here. And I also want to preface by saying you, as my friend and as my colleague that I work with, often get the rabbit trails of statistics that I'm going down, and then I talk about it, and at the very end you say, Kyle, what does this even matter? So this question is from Discord. It's from Greg B. Packers 88, and he says, which stats have you been cooking with in the lab? Are there any new metrics that you've been using more? I will let you start first because I think it'll start our conversation in the direction I want to take it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have heard us on this show, other shows, especially when you're looking at prospecting and rookie season performance, use yards per route run as a pretty predictive metric of how players will perform in the first couple years of their career. Like we've talked about that threshold. If you're below 1.0 yards per route run, it's very unlikely to happen for you. We're looking for like 2+ is kind of the elite of the elites. The Neighbors, the Brian Thomas Jr., Puka, Jamar Chase, like all these superstars are hitting that mark. So we're kind of looking to see like where do players fall on that scale. And I think it is pretty predictive, and the data has shown that. But one thing that I've also kind of been thinking about this year in the offseason, looking at wide receivers, not just prospects, but also forecasting like the upcoming season, is comparing first downs per route run to yards per route run. And there is a lot of overlap. Obviously, every time a player has a first down, they're accumulating yards. So there is some overlap there. But to me, like yards per route run can get a little noisy and inflated if a player is really reliant on big plays. And obviously, ADOT matters there. It's not that hard to kind of envision. Players that are hitting huge chunk plays are going to have a lot of yards on fewer routes, if that makes sense. But first downs per route run also kind of, I think, gives you a snapshot of not just like the best wide receivers in the game and how they perform, but more to me, I kind of use it like comparing yards per route run from first downs. First downs, I think, gives you some signal as to like more consistency type players in your lineup, whereas yards can be also the consistent players, but really some of those like boom bust profiles can pop in yards per route run, even though on a week-to-week basis, maybe they're not as consistent for us in fantasy.
Yeah, and I think when we're looking at a menu of statistics specifically for wide receiver, I think the word consistency for first downs per route run is a good way to look at it, because first downs can be noisy in the sense that they're not all created equally, right? Like somebody who gets a 5-yard out is different than someone who gets a 20+ yard play down the field. Also, touchdowns in the NFL count as a first down when you're scoring that way. So there is a double counting of fantasy points and what's good in that sense. But first downs per route run is usually, it's fairly sticky, and it's something that we can look at and say these are the better players who consistently get first downs, especially a lot of tight ends. You can see them separate from the field of like, this guy's, a first down monster, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, Trey McBride. I think one of the hardest parts of us doing this as a profession is we get asked all the time about different statistics and what new metrics is what this question is asking. And I'm almost a decade in, and I found that I love it. I love all the statistics. I love going a deep dive, but I've also found at the very end of all of this that sometimes it's just coloring in the lines when like we already have a really good outline in front of us of what matters in fantasy. In fact, the stickiest stuff year over year for wide receivers, let me read these to you. These are really advanced statistics, okay? So just hold on, bets. The stickiest wide receiver statistics are target share, targets per game, receptions, fantasy points. Like at the end of the day, we're trying to say a couple of different things in so many different ways, but like first downs per route run, if we look at the league leaders in that statistics, a lot of times we're like, oh yeah, these are the dudes, Puka and Nico and Amon-Ra, and like all the guys that like matter. So I do you feel like we can get into a trap sometimes, like what's the advanced data? And it's like, it kind of comes down to like target share. That's still what matters.
Yeah, I think even like 4 or 5 years ago, like some of the analysis around fantasy football was very basic of, these are the targets
Super
we're projecting.
basic people out
So
there.
basic. Fantasy points, like the stuff that matters. And then we kind of not moved away from those things, but everybody was doing a lot more nuanced research in the industry and trying to come up with different metrics and just trying to move the industry forward, which is great. Like you said, it's fun to do. But when it comes down to it, there's 100 different stats you could use for any player to describe their season or try to predict their season. And most of them are noisy, catchable target rate, stuff like that. A lot of it's just the guys that are going to see volume. And then the best players in fantasy are the guys that are going to see volume that are the most talented players in the game. It's really not, it's obviously super basic, and we can get more nuanced with our takes based off of scheme and play calling and quarterback play and all those things. But really, when it comes down to it, that is the stuff that matters. These other more nuanced stats, I think, can be helpful. But obviously, if you're using that as the only thing to try to forecast a player's career performance, then obviously you're kind of missing the boat there a little bit. But yeah, it's so funny that we do all this research years and years, and then you come back to it and you're like, oh, it's just targets. That's all that matters.
Yeah, Betz and I have an ongoing conversation, specifically when we look at projections week to week. Betz and I do a DFS and betting podcast, and when you look at projectable target share, often that's the route to go. It's like, okay, well, he's seeing a 25% target share. There's also certain stats that you need a certain amount of time in a season for them to actually hit a point where they're sustainable. Like yards per route run needs, I think, 10 games or 160 something routes. We've tested it and kind of seen okay, here's where it's stable, where you get that. I have been doing some deep dives, and I'm going to have an article out in the next couple of weeks about pre-snap motion. And my assumption for a lot of wide receivers has been, if they get motion, if the team's doing pre-snap motion, it's only a good thing. It's just that's where the things have trended in the NFL over the last couple of years is McVay systems or Mike McDaniel or Kyle Shanahan. Those are the offenses we like. They're ahead of the curve. Teams are using more pre-snap motion. The problem is that the NFL is a cat and mouse game. And so defenses aren't just sitting there and saying, wow, I have no idea what you're doing. In fact, they're adjusting year over year, and they were actually way better in 2024. But to give you an example, Cooper Kupp, a player that is kind of declining on first downs per route run and a lot of the metrics that we care about. But pre-snap, you think, oh, well, he can still be utilized this way. 58% of his routes involve pre-snap motion. That was the highest in the NFL. So you think that's a good thing. However, he actually averaged 0.36 fewer fantasy points per route run while using pre-snap motion. That was the largest decrease of any wide receiver in the NFL. So in other words, it was actually worse for him on plays with pre-snap motion. And so I'm using this in my analysis not to say, well, pre-snap motion is bad now, or just to give blanket statements, but more of getting some nuance about certain teams and how defenses reacted. So my big takeaway from that study was just that I think defenses are smarter and they're going to keep adjusting, and the NFL is going to have to keep changing year over year. Whatever was last season's statistics, we can't just copy and paste.
Yeah, it also reminds me a lot of the too high discussion for the last 2 or 3 years, right? Where for a while, a lot of the teams using this pre-snap motion type stuff were ahead of the curve. A lot of play callers using play action were ahead of the curve. And now it sounds silly to be like, oh, why aren't you using play action, right? Everybody does. Everybody's kind of using these things. And obviously some teams do it to a higher degree than others, but it's not, you're not at a huge advantage anymore doing it. It's
Right.
Obviously good to keep doing it, but it's not as big of an edge as it was maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And then you saw, okay, teams are beating us with these big plays. Let's play a lot of too high looks. What do you know? Now the run game is coming back into vogue, right? We saw last year a huge season for running backs, especially the veterans in fantasy. And now I'm kind of wondering, do we see another shift? Maybe defenses account for that again. And does the game swing back in the next year or two back to the passing game in a more efficient way? So yeah, it is a push and pull every year. And, not just offensive minds are taking in this information. It's obviously the defensive side too, which creates a trickle-down effect as to how it affects our game. So yeah, man, super interesting stuff for sure.
We're looking at macro trends of how the NFL is changing, and then you have to look at individual offenses and say, how are the Rams changing? For instance, a couple years ago, the Rams had a certain run scheme with Todd Gurley where they were outside zone, and Todd Gurley was unbelievable. And then at the end of the Todd Gurley years, they really had to change that, and they kind of developed this man gap scheme where they were just going to hit you in the mouth, and So there is the changing stuff. I love McVay, one, because he's a Georgia boy. So that means he's always going to get credit for that. But two, he always feels like he's like a step ahead of where the NFL is trending in the direction, 3 wide receivers, all these different types of things. So I love trying to think ahead and trying to guess of where things are heading. And then my last little trailing thought about statistics and what matters is I have done some deep dives about separation metrics, and we won't do a whole section on this. But I don't know how important they are, Betz. They don't correlate well with fantasy points. There's also about 4 or 5 definitions of what separation metrics are. And while I appreciate everybody in the industry, we have friends all over the place that are really nuanced. Like Matt Harmon's the best that we know of talking about wide receivers and coloring in the lines. Like he's the best of talking about how a wide receiver is utilized. But separation metrics from Harmon to fantasy points to NFL Next Gen are all very different. And I just know at the end of the day, like I think it more just like tells us a story rather than tells us what somebody is really good at for fantasy. So maybe it's just none of this matters, Betz. None of it.
Just draft the good players on the good teams who are good at football, and good things happen. I'm half joking, but kind of serious about that. Real quick on the open score thing, or like motion tracking type stuff. I think it's interesting, and I've used it before in certain stuff. Looking at mostly what I care about is like trends. Like if a player is like declining in those aspects and they're 32 years old, it's like, okay, maybe he is losing a step. We're always a little bit worried about the age cliff, that kind of stuff. But and I'm not dunking on ESPN Open Score. I think it's a fun metric to look at. I think it can have a lot of value. But just looking at last year, like Dontavian Wicks was 4th in the NFL in Open Score. It's like, okay, does that mean anything? I don't know. He's not putting up a lot of fantasy points, right? That's what we care about. I know his catch rate hasn't been great, but like that's a factor. George Kittle is kind of like middling in this, but George Kittle's a beast, right? Like George Kittle's awesome. So it's like anything else. Just use it as a factor. It's not on the high priority list for me, but fun to look at for sure.
Yeah, and I, like I said, I love all of these things. I love all of these statistics that we're able to use to tell a story, to start a conversation. And I think with separation metrics, I will have an article that comes out. I'm titling it so far, Separation Metrics, What Are They Good For? And you can fill in the line if you want to for the rest of it. But it is fun to discuss.
Now, I do have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're a Falcons guy. Kyle Pitts, out of
he's awesome. He's amazing.
Out of 159 players in the database from last year in Open Score, he was 151st. So maybe it is predictive. I don't know.
Whoa. No. I see. The best part about statistics, you choose to believe whatever you want to believe based on your narrative and only hone in on just one statistic. So, we can just forever mention that he had 1,000 yards as a rookie, and that still is meaningful, right?
He'll be 29 and we'll be like, you know what, man? That rookie year, 1,000 yards. Pour one out.
Somebody's going to give that at his funeral, his eulogy, that's going to start off and say, well, we all know that Kyle Pitts had 1,000 yards as a rookie. And everyone's like, but did it get better? It did not get better. Anyway, let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk about some benches.
It's Dynasty Bench Warfare.
All right. Dynasty benches, I don't know if it's like the sexiest topic in late June, but I'm sure there's some people out there say, finally, like I wanted to talk about the nastiest of nasties. We will have a full show in August where we give our nasty boys of the summer our picks. And don't look back at the hit rate, because the goal is to pick the dirtiest of dirty names. Like Mike picked Rico Dowdle last year, and that was like his dude. Was that dirty enough, though? Like, we knew he was going to be part of the mix. I want somebody that, we're not sure they're going to be in the NFL anymore.
I mean, that's the point of the segment, right? Like, we're not trying to hit on a guy every year. We're trying to hit on one guy every, 8 years. I remember, I don't know if it was last summer or the year before, but I'll call myself out on this. Keontae Ingram was a guy I was like, could he win the RB2 job? Maybe. And I'm pretty sure, actually, I'm not actually sure at all where he is anymore. I think he's maybe
he's a Chief.
I was going to say, I think he might be on the Chiefs, but clearly not going to make the team. So yeah, that segment's fun. It's meant to be kind of like a pick this dude off the waivers and see what happens. But yeah, man, that show is always a lot of fun.
The way that this segment's going to work is we're going to talk through a couple of different positions, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and give you some names. Just we're going to throw spaghetti at the wall. Some of it's going to stick, and some of it's going to be helpful for some of you. I realize that somebody listening out there is saying, not in my league. We're not saying these players are available. We're just saying they're probably at the end of your bench, on your bench, or potentially out there on waiver wires, and just kind of go through some of those. Let us be clear, though. Like, Dynasty benches is a lot of the time about who is first to the waiver wire, who is active, because being passive in Dynasty, although it's a really chill format in parts of the year, if you are passive, you will miss out on certain players. You know, we always give the examples of like the Pukas or the Tyreek Hills that were out there on waiver wire, and then over the summer, they were the pickup, or they were your 4th round rookie pick, or whatever it was in your league. But not making a decision at all is a decision in itself. It's basically saying, like, I'm not going to do anything. So I wrote an article last summer, Dynasty Bench Strategy, 5 steps so you don't fart around this summer, if you want to go through some of that. One of the tasks on there is to clean house of the dusty wide receivers, which is really hard. Like, that's one of the hardest parts of cleaning out a Dynasty bench, is looking at your roster and saying, hey, I spent a 2nd round rookie pick on any of these dudes, Tyquan Thornton, Sky Moore, Jonathan Mingo, any of those kind of guys. And you're looking at it and say, well, I've only had 1 year. Who knows what they could become? Usually they end up being better trade pieces than players that break out in year 2. Now, there's exceptions, like DJ Chark was hurt and did nothing in year 1, and then as a sophomore completely exploded. It can happen. But we do have a number of thresholds we'll talk about with yards per out run, targets per out run. If they didn't hit this in year 1 or year 2, you probably need to clean house. There's some other steps on there about training camp hype and all those things, which we'll talk about more and more. But every single roster, or every single league rather, is different. We're going to probably talk about league sizes that are probably like 25 to 30 spots. Some of them have way more. Some of you guys have taxi squads where you can put rookies on there, 5 or more, maybe 2nd-year guys. Everyone's different. I think, generally speaking, I want to find a bench that can help my team be resilient. So my starters look really, really good, but I've kind of maneuvered, or I've traded in a way where my team actually is set if one of my stud wide receivers goes down, because I have 5 or 6 of them. Or I have somebody like last year I had a team with Mooney and Juwan Jennings. I did not think that those dudes were going to be starters for me, but they ended up being almost every week flexes for my squad. So any general thoughts about what you need from a Dynasty bench before we get into specific player takes?
I think it's a lot different than redraft, where, you know, in redraft leagues, you can pretty much week to week count on like one guy that you can pick up and put in your starting lineup off the waiver wire in redraft leagues. In Dynasty, as long as your league is competitive, assuming like a normal, 12-man league or whatever, like the waiver wire, especially in season, is like literally not helpful at all. So the way that you combat that, in my opinion, is to get some flex-worthy type guys, or at least like you can see a path for them to hit your flex on your bench, like you said, in the event of injuries, bye weeks, those kind of things. In deep leagues, like if you're starting 2 flexes, or some leagues are a little crazy, they start 3 flexes or whatever it is, super flex, like you're starting some guys that in a normal redraft league you might not even consider starting, right? So you have to kind of know like what the archetypes are and what the potential path to opportunity is for some of these players. And that to me is kind of what the bench is all about. I'm more willing to kind of trade in deep leagues, 1 for 2s, 2s for 3s kind of thing, where you're talking about 2 players on one side, 3 on the other, to get more depth, especially if I feel like I've got a pretty good contender. But for the most part, like I said, very, very different than redraft, obviously. And the waiver wire is not going to help you in season. So being able to kind of get your bench ready to go when we look towards July and August is a goal of mine as well this time of year.
And just realize the different windows of value for players that fill the bench spot, right? Like somebody like Darnell Mooney was an under the radar signing. I know he's a Falcon, throw that aside, but somebody that we said, hey, he's going to be on the field a ton. Maybe he's a better and best ball type of format guy. And yet, whatever your 3rd round pick was that you took last year, I promise you, for the most part, unless it was Bucky Irving, he probably wasn't that helpful for your team. And so a lot of the guys that we'll talk about, where you were holding on to your second and third round pick so tightly during the draft season, if you would have let that go, in September, October, or even a little earlier when the depth charts kind of fill out, those are the type of players that you can flip, because everybody else was saying Tyquan Thornton is who I wanted to take with my third round pick. Like that's what you're dealing with. Those are the names that we're looking through: the Malachi Corleys, Dylan Laube, whoever else you took last year, that maybe you need to clean house. Like Dylan Laube should not be on a roster, right? Raiders running back who fumbled his own lone carry.
Why are you signaling out? Poor Dylan, man. This guy's trying to make the team, and you're out here dunking on him. No, but I agree with you. That type of player, not rosterable.
What did oh man, I forgot I did this, that I made a video. This is why it came to mind. I made a video of, on Twitter, I said, time to dive into every Dylan Laube carry from the 2024 season. And he just fumbled his only one. Is that mean?
That's super mean, man. Poor guy goes to a small school. He's psyched to be in the NFL, and some random person on Twitter named Kyle Borgnoni is dunking on him. Come on, man.
I know, but he was getting hype last year if he could be the guy. Okay? Of like, oh, well, he's a late round dart throw. This is somebody. Every year there's all those people. I think we just don't realize the roster turnover in the NFL, and then much less for a dynasty team. So that team looks completely different a year from now. Anyway, let's talk about some running backs first on your bench that have some standalone value. So these are guys that probably, you could start as a flex worthy play early on. There's room for more in the backfield. And yet we're not saying you have to go acquire these guys. We just think they're valuable players to have in your flex. So you go first.
Yeah, I want to talk about Jordan Mason. And obviously nobody's really surprised by the fact that he's a guy who will have standalone value. But I think, looking at him this year in Minnesota, it's pretty clear that the Vikings looked to Aaron Jones' season. They were very happy with it. He was great. They rewarded him with, I think it was a 2-year deal to stay in Minnesota. But based off of the conversation that you're hearing some of the coach speak, and based off of kind of their actions of trading for Jordan Mason, they didn't really have a lot of draft capital. Remember, they only had, I think it was 4 picks in the NFL draft. So they said, okay, how can we kind of get a complement to Aaron Jones? Maybe signaling this running back is about to be 30 years old. He's entering age 31 season here later this year. Do they really want to load him up with the opportunities that he had last year? Coming off career high in total opportunities, Aaron Jones is from this past year. And when you think about his career arc in Green Bay and stuff, he's always been, the lead back, but not always been a 25 touch type of guy. He's kind of shared the backfield for most of his career. Last year, they kind of were just forced into feeding him the ball over and over again. And I think this move with Jordan Mason tells us a lot. I still think Aaron Jones is going to be the leader in the backfield. And I think if I was going to pick one guy to have, obviously I'd prefer him. But Jordan Mason was good last year in San Francisco. And the fact they trade for him, you hear them talk about needing a bigger back in the backfield, signals potential goal line opportunities. So for me, when I'm looking at a flex play, on a week-to-week basis, Jordan Mason can definitely fit the bill, especially if he's getting touchdowns. And just for context, last year, there were 70 running backs that had 50-plus carries. He was 7th in yards per carry, 3rd in explosive rush rate, 8th in missed tackles forced per attempt. So he was very, very good on a per-touch basis. This Minnesota offensive line, I also think is going to be really good. They drafted Donovan Jackson in the first round. They added a couple guys in free agency as well. We'll see when they get their left tackle back. He's coming off of a major knee injury, so maybe he gets stronger as the year goes on. But in general, most people are viewing this Minnesota offensive line as a conservatively, top 10 unit. So if J.J. McCarthy is him and this scheme is as good as it's been with Kevin O'Connell, there's going to be, I think, some flex weeks for Jordan Mason, even if Aaron Jones stays healthy. But obviously, if Jones would happen to go down and miss time, then you're talking about a potential, plug and play top 15 option every week in Jordan Mason.
Yeah. I was looking at, I'm looking at yards per carry, but also how often does this player get 5 yards on a carry? Because yards per carry can kind of get skewed a little bit. But the only running backs better than Jordan Mason last year were Bijan Robinson and Derrick Henry. He had the same rate as Jahmyr Gibbs, Bucky Irving. 41% of his carries went for 5+ yards. And it's telling what this team wanted to do and how they're approaching it this way. I do worry about him as a pass catcher and what is his ceiling, but we know that he can carry the load if given the opportunity. And I feel like he's not that expensive. So if you're the Aaron Jones manager, are you trying to lock this up for your bench? Like, are you trying to trade for Mason to say, like, I have the Vikings backfield?
What's interesting about that approach is, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea or anything like that, but just
It's so soft. Is that what you're saying?
so soft, Kyle. No, what I was going to say is, like, Kevin O'Connell's teams over the last couple of years have been very pass heavy. So, like, even if, Jones goes down or Mason goes down, like, obviously those guys would see a bump in production and usage and be great in fantasy. But, like, the offense, no matter what is happening in the backfield, is going to run through Justin Jefferson, Hawkinson, and Addison, whenever Addison's not suspended. So, like, I don't see oh my goodness, like, they're building the offensive game plan around this running back room. I think that's unlikely. So, like you said, from a ceiling standpoint, I don't think either guy is capable of giving you a top 5, 6, 7, 8 type season, like middle RB2, back end RB2, assuming everything breaks right, maybe from an injury perspective or what have you. That's kind of how I see it. So I'd be careful, like, trading a lot to lock up the backfield, but certainly if it's a manageable cost in a trade, which I can't imagine Jordan Mason's going to cost you that much, then I don't hate the idea. But I still think regardless, the offense is going to run through or flow through the pass game, I should say.
Aaron Jones is just such an outlier, man. Like, everything that you should look at in terms of age curve, changing teams, he just kicked it in the face, saw the most opportunities of his career. And then I was looking at the type of targets he saw. Like, Aaron Jones, like, on the season saw 59 targets. That's a really, really good number. 51 receptions, but 81% of his targets were non-checkdown targets, meaning, like, they were, like, legit good targets that you want for the running back position, where Jordan Mason's not that. So I don't mind the approach if you want to lock up the backfield. I think I would just probably wait. It's a safety measure. Like you said, it's not really like an upside play to say, like, I'm going to get both of them and see what happens, but he will eventually probably cost a second. You're not going to get him for cheaper.
For sure.
Okay. I want to bring up Austin Eckler because he punched me in the face, man. I did not think another player, speaking of changing teams later in his career, but among running backs with 100 touches last year, he led all of them in yards per touch, 6.5. He was just, like, good and consistent. He averaged 10.7 fantasy points per game on just 10 opportunities. So he's pretty efficient, and then he missed the final 2 months with a concussion, and yet in the playoffs, he was a 50-50 guy. Do you project the Washington backfield to continue to be about a 50-50 split between B-Rob and Eckler?
I think that's a pretty fair starting point, depending on what happens with some of the ancillary pieces there. But, they both escaped running back in the draft. I think they're going to run it back with these two as the top options, with Eckler kind of being more of that, pass catching role type of situation, and B-Rob as the early down hammer. But I think close to 50-50 is probably a fair starting point.
I wanted to bring him up not as somebody to trade for, like, given his age and everything else, but, like, you get to view Eckler as somebody who could be a startable fantasy running back. And if B-Rob does go down, as somebody you're like, wow, I'm excited to start him as a top 20-ish running back, which is, like, super valuable, especially if you play, like, in a full PPR league. He gets a slight bump. I'm interested also to see how the targets shake out there with Debo in tow. But Austin Eckler not only was better than I thought he was going to be this past year, I think he's just a valuable part of this team, like the winning culture, everything else there. So Austin Eckler, despite being super old, 30 years old, I think can be valuable. I did look back Dynasty-wise. He was once the RB5 overall in Dynasty years ago. What a time.
Dude, he was awesome with the Chargers for all those years. And to that point, like, when we thought about Eckler back in those days, and I'm not saying he's the same player, but for a while it was like, yeah, can he really be a goal line back, right? 5'9", like 200-ish pounds, not your typical prototype of, like, give this guy the ball at the goal line, but he was always really good in that role. So like you said, if Brian Robinson would happen to go down, I think that he would be a good candidate to get some of that work too. So yeah, I think he's a very solid, obviously not like super sexy at this point type of player to have on your bench, but there's going to be bye weeks, injuries that, I need a flex play. Eckler will be fine in that role, I think.
All right, so let's move to a couple other running back categories. Young insurance running backs. These are running backs in year 2. You have Will Shipley of the Eagles listed. I have Marshawn Lloyd. Both of these guys basically did nothing Lloyd, he almost had more injuries than times he touched the ball, which was only 7 on the year. And so there's really nothing you can say about him. And Shipley was pretty much irrelevant with Saquon having a... So we can't really give a ton of analysis other than it seems like they're the dudes in the backfield unless you're really scared of A.J. Dillon. The Packers didn't add anyone else. And Lloyd had day 2 draft capital, and my studies have shown that if you weren't used very much, if you had under 70 touches, and the team used day 2 draft capital, the next year, not only do you see a bump, but you could see like double-digit per game workload. It's still going to be Josh Jacobs' show, but I think he's a valuable young insurance back that you definitely don't want to cut that guy, and you kind of want to see what they're going to do. Like, nothing went right last year, so I think you will like Lloyd more than Shipley. Or maybe I'm wrong because you're an Eagles homer.
I mean, they're both, I think, very similar bets. If you're even making it that term, like if Jacobs and Saquon both stay healthy, these guys probably don't hit your lineup at all this year, right? Like that's just kind of the truth. But both Jacobs and Saquon are coming off massive, insane workloads last year. Saquon, especially, including the playoffs and Super Bowl, 482 total touches. That is an absolute ton. So if they miss, it doesn't even have to be a season-ending injury, like an ankle sprain, a couple of weeks with the hamstring, whatever. Like you're getting a plug-and-play starting asset on your bench right now that these guys are both just afterthoughts in fantasy football, which I'm not saying that's wrong. Like they just kind of are. But yeah, I think they're both very similar bets. I think Shipley is like the sneakier of the two just because, I don't know, some people seem to think A.J. Dillon might be the candidate to be the RB2 here. Philly Voice's Jimmy Kempski does a great job covering the team. Indicated pretty strongly like the team is counting on Shipley to fill in that RB2 role. So I am not in that camp. I'm more on the Shipley over AJ Dillon camp. Remember, Dillon missed an entire year with a serious neck injury. His contract is 1 year, only $167,000 guaranteed. So there's no commitment to him at all. And when you go back to kind of what we look for from prospecting into the pros, we're generally looking for running backs that at least have some pass catching in their profile. At Clemson, Shipley had a really nice production profile when it comes to his pass game. Usage just under 13% reception share, which for a running back in college is very strong. So I know Mike liked him quite a bit too coming out of Clemson. But yeah, it's just basically if either Jacobs or Saquon miss time, these guys are in good offenses playing behind really good offensive lines. There's going to be worse, starters in your league than these two guys if that scenario plays out.
I'm going to read you A.J. Dillon's Dynasty blurb.
Oh, no.
In the Ultimate Draft Kit. Okay, this is what it says. The artist formerly known as A.J. Dillon is in year 5/6, because he missed one, of a feature film known as Quadzilla. While there was a ton of hype early on for this movie, the reviews are in. Dillon is better suited for a hired muscle role than as a featured final boss. Notice that we did not talk about his actual Dynasty outlook, because he has none. He's barely on this team. He has a 1-year contract with 167 guaranteed. It's not a bet worth taking to me. I mean, yes, if you want to stash him on your bench, you can't cut that guy, but I would cut A.J. Dillon.
You can't, but also you should. No, obviously, just make sure.
Not right now, though.
Right. When we get in camp and it's like, oh, it's obviously Will Shipley is the RB2, then you can probably cut A.J. Dillon. But definitely something to monitor. And remember, too, with the Eagles, Kenneth Gainwell, obviously it wasn't a huge factor in the offense, but he's gone too. So like Shipley kind of has to fill that like third down pass catching role in a way, but also if Saquon, like I said, would miss time, I think it'd be Shipley.
All right, I want to list a couple of lottery ticket running backs. Later on, we'll go through some other names, but Sean Tucker is one that Betz is probably sick of me talking about. I've talked about him all summer for best ball.
Keep going, man. Keep going.
Really?
Lean into it. This is your identity is with Sean Tucker. If Sean Tucker doesn't do anything this year, your credibility is gone. If he hits, I mean, you're a genius.
Yeah, and that's the best part about these kind of picks is like you sound smart or, you know what, don't worry about that guy. Don't even worry about it. But Sean Tucker, sparingly used in year 1, year 2, on his touches was good. And I think that he's the more efficient back as a runner than Rachaad White. Like they're still going to use Rachaad White as a third down back, but he's in a contract year. And there was some talk, Betz has brought this up a couple times around the combine of just like, hey, they like Sean Tucker. They could see him being the guy moving forward behind Bucky Irving. So I think it's not set in stone that this is just how the backfield is forever in Tampa Bay. It's going to be those two and then Sean Tucker farting around. I just think he's one of those names at the end of the bench that I would love to have, and I think that there's a better percentage chance that he ends up being, somebody that like makes noise this year in a backfield that we know uses more than one back.
Yeah, for sure. I think the way I'm thinking about Sean Tucker is a potential, he's on waiver wires, by the way. So if he is, scoop him up. I think Rachaad White's role probably doesn't change that much, regardless of what happens to Bucky Irving. Like if Bucky Irving misses time, obviously White would get more touches. I'm not saying that, but I think Sean Tucker would be the replacement for the early down runner category, the guy that would get most of the work if they're winning, that type of thing. And White would still stay in that pass catching role is kind of how I'm thinking about it. So it's kind of a thin needle to thread with Tucker, but that's why we're bringing up as a lottery ticket. But yes, if he's on your waiver wire, I would scoop him up. I remember he had that insane game against the Saints this past year. So, and people liked him coming out of Syracuse. He was a guy that fell in the draft because of, I think it was a serious neck injury, if I'm not mistaken, but a lot of people were very surprised he went undrafted.
Yeah, I mean, I went back and watched all the Sean Tucker touches because that's what I get to do in the summer. They were really good, man. Like on a per touch basis, he was awesome and really good as a receiver. There's not many of them to look through, but yeah, that one game, he was a monster. You have Brashad Smith of the Chiefs, 7th round running back. You can always say, hey, look what they did recently with Pacheco and a 7th round running back. Who knows? Who knows exactly how he's going to be used, but this is somebody in your bench that I don't know what the Kansas City backfield is in 2026. So he's more of a taxi squad play, probably going to end up mostly playing special teams in year one. But, Mitchell, Hunt, Pacheco, they're not under contract in 2026.
Yeah, that's really kind of what it comes down to with Brashard Smith. And we know draft capital is the most important thing that matters in the NFL, especially at running back. 7th round pick, obviously I'm not expecting this to hit, but there's a chance that he carves out a role. And if he's okay this year, then maybe they give him a little bit of a longer look next year. Because when you look at the contracts for Kansas City, Elijah Mitchell and Kareem Hunt are there on 1-year deals. Isaiah Pacheco is in his contract year as a former late round pick. And then it's like Carson Steele, and I've literally never heard of Elijah Young, but he's on the roster too.
Oh man, don't apologize to his family.
I'm sorry, Elijah Young. I'm sure you're a great guy. So Brashard Smith, there's a potential that he could have a role in some capacity this year, and that grows next year is kind of what I'm hinting at. He has been kind of getting a little bit of buzz as he's working with the ones in certain packages, in minicamp and stuff. And obviously we don't want to take conclusions from minicamp, but I'm at least monitoring, does that stick in training camp? Remember, he was a former wide receiver in college. So I talked about when we're looking for these kind of ambiguous dart throws, I at least want somebody that can catch the football. And as a former wide receiver, no surprise, he's very good at that. So I don't know. Could you see a potential Jerick McKinnon-esque role if things break right for him? I think it's possible. Unlikely, but possible. But definitely a guy I'm stashing wherever I can.
I, for one, obviously know Elijah Young. We have a long history over the last 2 minutes of Googling, but Western Kentucky Hilltopper, undrafted free agent.
Okay. Go Elijah.
I just wanted to mention the Hilltoppers. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll talk about wide receivers. I went back to last year's show doc when we talked about Dynasty benches, and one of the names we brought up was some dude named Cedric Tillman, who had a brief moment. We're not saying it's going to be great, but he's one of those guys that you would be really excited to have as a flex-worthy play entering this year as an every down player for the Browns. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here, is find players that can either gain value, or you're looking at your bench and saying, how can I find this? It's not the sexiest topic, but I think in Dynasty, it's those small edges we're trying to find. So veterans that have a role, I wanted to list 2 names that are gross. Darius Slayton, who the Giants hate, but apparently still love. And then Demarcus Robinson, who is now on the 49ers, I think could have a role early on, depending on Brandon Ayuk. Might be a better and best ball type of play, but I feel like both of those guys are if you're in a league that rewards big plays, I'm fine with them at the end of your bench. Darius Slayton, I would never cut that guy because he's won me money in DFS and I love him. But he had 6 end zone targets last year and had 0 total touchdowns, while Demarcus Robinson led the entire Rams team in end zone targets. But feels like they're the same player at the end of the day. But I'm fine with them having a role on their team.
Darius Slayton is hilarious. Like, I actually have him in a league, and I mean, for like 4 years in a row, like in the offseason, you get there and you're like, is there really going to be a role for Darius Slayton? And you convince yourself at different times, like, there's never a chance. And then all of a sudden he'll flash for a week or two here or there, and you're like, I can't cut that guy. And it's so funny because, like, for years, like, he was a totally serviceable, wide receiver 3 in the NFL.
He was good as a rookie. He was a top 36 wide receiver as a rookie.
He was good as a rookie, yeah. And then it was like slowly they were just like, nah, we're good. Like, they just didn't want to put him on the field. And then, the contract situation comes up, and then this offseason it's like 3 years, over $30 million. It's like, okay, what are we doing here? So yeah, I don't know. But if you've got him, keep him. This one is not as much of a nasty boy, but Christian Kirk, the shine is obviously worn off a lot in the last couple of years. He had that huge season in Jacksonville, and since then it's been injury riddled and all those things. But I just think when you look at the Houston Texans, we're all very excited about the Iowa State guys. I know, Kyle, you are, and a lot of people are, that took him in rookie drafts. But I really think the slot job is going to be Christian Kirk's for this year over Jalen Noel. So for me, I think if I need like a gross veteran that I can maybe get with like a super late second or early third or 2/3, that kind of like gross deal. And it's like, you know what? I got 4 or 5 weeks with Christian Kirk in my flex. I would probably do that as a contender. So he's a guy I'm at least monitoring to see what's going on here. And, peripherals on him have still been pretty decent. Like the last 3 years, 1.72, 2.07, 1.75 yards per route run. I don't think he's like washed or anything like that. I think he's still a solid NFL player. You need Houston to pass more and kind of live in through wide receiver sets for this to work. But under the new OC, there's a chance that happens. So Christian Kirk, I've always liked him.
You've always loved him.
Couple years it worked. Last couple years it has not worked. So we'll see.
I think what's the problem is just you're not going to see the volume that you want in the past. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is to monitor what is the identity of the team earlier on. Their defense is awesome, and maybe that's how they win. But if they're in shootouts, I think he is going to be one of those players that does have these random like 8 or 9 catch kind of games. And in a full PPR league, I think you can be fine with him as like a second flex. So yeah, make sure you like understand what he could be for your team. And then also if he's on your team and he has a couple of spike weeks, like he's an easy player to also flip later on. I have a new category called Young and Hopeful. Sounds like a soap opera, The Young and the Hopeful, kind of like The Young and the Restless. But I'm just labeling this as Rams wide receiver 3 because Tutu got the contract extension for 1 year. What, $10 million? The Tutu / Diami Brown contract of like, that's hey, right. Just go run deep. And maybe it'll work out. And then Jordan Whittington. So one of those two we know are going to be on the field a ton. Maybe they rotate in certain situations, but the Rams wide receiver 3 has been a pretty valuable role from at least projecting routes. I talked about DeMarcus Robinson. And the caveat, if Puka, who's dealt with injuries, and Devontae Adams, if they go down, I think Whittington, in limited opportunities last year, was targeted on 25% of his routes. 2.62 yards per route run is really impressive, even though it's a small sample size. He's somebody that if I had on my bench, I'd be like, I'm excited. I don't know what he is. I don't know what this team is. Maybe Stafford retires next year. But for now, I think he's a valuable bench stash for now.
Yeah, I mean, Whittington, like, he was a guy that I wasn't really, nobody really was in Dynasty, excited about him before preseason. But as soon as the preseason games happen, you're like, this dude is dominating. And I'm granted, it's preseason, right? So like, I'm not saying it was the only thing, but it's like you put on that film and you're like, oh, this dude can actually play. And then in a small sample, when he did get opportunity, we saw him flash a little bit. So yeah, I think there's something there, at least a bench stash for sure. And PFF using their yards per route run data, including the playoffs, they have him at 2.46. I'm not saying this to skew the stat, but it was better than Brian Thomas Jr. So you tell me, Kyle, who's a better wide receiver.
And well, I know who I'm taking in my startup first.
Yeah, check the tape, dude.
Yeah, I'm taking BTJ.
Yeah, it's so funny. Very, very limited sample size. 29 total targets last year, but maybe there's something there. And Matthew Stafford always supports wide receivers in fantasy, so I like that quite a bit. I will throw out a former UDFA out of Holy Cross. Jalen Coker was quietly pretty good last year when he got some
opportunities.
He's
on my team, so only good things.
He's on your squad?
Yeah.
There you go. Now, obviously, we should temper expectations because they did draft a wide receiver 8th overall in Tedero McMillan. But when you look at kind of how this depth chart could shake out over the next couple of seasons, like, Thielen, I think this is probably his last year. They have a void year in his contract next year. Hunter Renfrow, for whatever reason, was brought back on a 1-year deal. And then, you've got Xavier Legette, but I think there's a chance that maybe in a year, they could potentially have a 3-wide receiver set of T-Mac, Legette, and Jalen Coker. If he sticks around, they have to re-sign him. He's on an exclusive rights free agent deal, so he's a free agent next year. But if he's back as a cheap wide receiver 3 for this team, and Canales can get the best of Bryce Young, I mean, Coker is a really fun upside type of stash. And just for context, the reason I'm bringing that up as a potential 3-wide receiver set is because with Adam Thielen out of the lineup last year, in a few games, he had a slot rate of 75% per PFF. So you can play inside, he can play outside, which gives him a little bit of, multiple outs to get on the field if injuries break right. But yeah, Jalen Coker, 1.72 yards per route run, was very, very solid. For context, fewer routes and it's different, but for context, Xavier Legette was at 1.19. So when he was on the field, he was doing stuff.
Yep. If you have a taxi squad where you can keep players through 2 years, like he's somebody I would definitely want to stash there. Another category for wide receivers is called young, but it's not happening. And I just want to mention that Jalen Hyatt, if you're stashing him, I'm fine if you just let him go. Like just put him out to sea, push him over, Viking funeral style. This was a guy who's taken 3rd round 2 years ago. And through 2 years, he has been targeted on 10% of his routes, and his yards per route run is 0.75. His routes per game went down by more than 6 per game. It's like a terrible list. It's not happening. What he did at Tennessee was really fun, including that, 5-touchdown game against Alabama. But it's a very different offense than translating the NFL. I think Jalen Hyatt is one of those players that was really fun in college, and that's all we're going to be able to say.
Yeah, and I think he picked up another injury in minicamp, if I'm not mistaken, which is not what you want if you're trying to make the roster. Speaking of making the roster, it sounds crazy to say, but there's already some rumblings of Malachi Corley might not even make this team for New York, which is crazy considering the depth chart. Obviously Garrett Wilson is his own thing on the depth chart, but there is nobody behind him. Alan Lazard and Josh Reynolds are kind of the main competition, and the fact that they're even this wasn't our guy from last year's regime, is he even going to make the roster, says a lot. So I would be shocked if this works with Malachi Corley.
Yeah, I'm if you need to drop him, you can drop him if you don't have a taxi squad.
Thanks, Kyle. I did earlier this offseason, and I'm glad that you approve.
How did it feel?
I'm not going to lie. It was one of those, you can't drop this guy. This was I think 3rd round pick last year.
Yes.
But then I did it, and I'm sleeping great, Kyle. It's fine.
Yeah, there's so many wide receivers like this that if we don't have the context of, I have this spreadsheet that's called Advanced Wide Receiver Data, and there's a whole section that's called Red Flags. And it's I literally add red flags before they get drafted. If there's draft capital concerns, if there's year 1 concerns, year 2. If you build up enough red flags after year 1 and year 2, then you need to be able to just drop this player. Jalen Polk is one of those guys we keep, bringing up on this podcast, but it's oh, but he was a 2nd round pick. Oh, but the depth chart's not that good. There were red flags going in. There's red flags a ton in year 1. And it's one of those things where you're scared that he turns into Devontae Parker, which is different. It's a 1st round draft pick who broke out in year 5. It's such a low hit rate. We remember the biggest names ever. Same thing with tight ends. You have that one random Gary Barnidge year, or Tyler Eifert comes out of nowhere, and you go, I could have that. It's just such a low hit rate, and you're trying to turn over your roster in a way that you can benefit yourself, and the waiver wire or rookies now is probably a better bet for the most part. Jahan Dotson. Can you drop Jahan Dotson?
Absolutely.
That is something I don't want to do in one of my leagues, and another one I did. So that's how I did it, the happiness hedge.
Keep him in one, drop him in the other.
Yeah. There's a team that's rebuilding, and I'm oh, you know what? He could really help my squad if he turns things around. And then I'm also saying well, basically need A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith to get hurt. I don't want that either. So you got to be able to understand the context, and moving on sounds really tough, but over time, I think it'll benefit you most of the time. I did want to mention some taxi squad heroes really quickly. Some guys that I have in a couple leagues. Arian Smith, who was a 4th-round pick of the Jets. You talked about that depth chart for the Jets wide receiver room. I have him stashed. Don't know if it's going to work. At Georgia, he was very inconsistent and not the guy. I also have an undrafted free agent wide receiver for the Falcons, Nick Nash, who, if you look at production metrics this past year from San Jose State, just crushed, but it was his first year as a wide receiver. I'm stashing because I don't think Ray McLeod is a long-term answer in the slot, and we'll see what this offense is with Michael Penix. So it's a stash and see. Those are 2 names I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Speaking of these undrafted guys that you're like, I don't know, maybe he makes the team. Am I pronouncing this right? Efton Chisholm?
Yeah, baby, of the Patriots.
Went to same school as Cooper Kupp. Fun fact there. He is apparently crushing in minicamp and OTAs and all that stuff for whatever that means. I mean, who isn't these days?
Except for Malachi Corley.
Yeah, sadly, he's the only one. But apparently was doing great in OTAs and minicamp and has kind of carved out a role potentially on the team as a potential slot player. The problem is Pop Douglas is kind of already there, so I don't know if this is like a future play, but not expecting much. But man, there's definitely worse stashes you could have right now in your taxi squad. If all this hype comes to fruition, he's a name I'll be, kind of closely monitoring in training camp. And then the other one I have is Gunnar Helm, which is really funny because when we think about Gunnar Helm, the last thing that happened was he just like bombed the combine, right? He was like all-time slow for a tight end.
Texas tight end now with the Titans.
Thank you. But he rolled his ankle, right? So like a lot of the speed metrics and stuff look quite frankly horrible for Gunnar Helm. But I don't know, man. Maybe there's something there. He had more production in terms of the share of the offense than Matthew Golden, than Isaiah Bond. Like, I don't know. Maybe there's something there. Chigakonkwo is in a contract year. So in theory, there's a path for him to be the starting tight end as the season goes on, or maybe next year. Just not sure. But like I said, there are probably worse guys you could stash on your waiver wire or on your taxi squad.
Tight ends, I just want to quickly mention Aronde Gadsden II, who the Chargers took in the 5th round. Before the season, Marvin Eloquin highlighted him because he was hurt with a Lisfranc injury and it killed his draft stock. But his sophomore year was just off the charts, like 99th percentile. Really good stuff from one of our writers, Marvin Eloquin, dynasty-wise. And 5th round tight ends don't really hit. There's George Kittle, and that's about it. And yet, he's somebody that has made a little noise that you can put in your taxi squad, see what the Chargers offense is, see if he carves out a role. And you're old because I played his dad on my dynasty roster, or not dynasty, on my redraft team way back in the day when he was on the Dolphins. So that makes me feel old.
That's hilarious. All throughout, and this is not a secret to people, but like Kelsey's probably in his last year. Nobody was really excited about Noah Gray. His yards per run type stuff has not been very good, but he's only 26 years old, which for tight end dynasty is not that old. Just if he's the heir apparent to Kelsey, there's some value there potentially. But the other one that I think is kind of sneaky is Cade Stover, former Ohio State tight end. I didn't really love him a ton coming out of school, but Dalton Schultz last year when Stover was healthy and active, his routes and his playing time dipped a little bit. So there's kind of some push and pull here where like Schultz is the starter, but they kind of want to see what they have in Stover. And then there's a chance next year Stover is their starting tight end because Dalton Schultz can be cut for just $2.5 million, saving the team a bunch of money next year. So I think this is the last year we have of Dalton Schultz in Houston. And so Cade Stover maybe is the starter next year. Who knows?
Dude, I didn't know Big Irv was on that team.
The GOAT, Big Irv. Man, I was so excited about Irv Smith for a year or two there. I think he was in Kansas City last year.
He was. I feel like he's one of those names, like he's a dynasty all-star. Never really helped us, but man, what a dynasty all-star. All right, let's play a game.
Stash or trash?
All right, Betz and I are going to go back and forth, listing some names, and maybe we disagree. But all this is really just saying, hey, would you cut that guy? Are you willing to cut that guy? We're not telling you have to, because there's like in my league, I'm not cutting anyone ever. I only made good decisions.
It's like, Kyle, you've been over the roster limit for 3 years in a row. Come on, man, Get it together.
The legal roster is left and right. All right, we're gonna mostly do running backs and wide receivers, but I mean, let's just at least get this one out of the way. Trey Lance.
Absolutely not. You cannot cut that guy. Yeah, you can cut him.
Okay, in a one quarterback league, you can cut him. But in a Superflex league, I really am rostering him, not just for the bit of, that he's Trey Lance, but because he's the backup for Justin Herbert, right?
We'll see.
That's how I'm viewing it. It's probably not. Okay, running backs. CEH, who is on one of your Dynasty rosters. I saw him there. His roster percentage was super low, 26% in Dynasty leagues, which Dynasty league roster percentages are wildly all over the place. I don't really trust them that much. But you have CEH.
You can probably cut him. I mean, they have like 19 running backs currently behind Alvin Kamara, so who knows? But yeah, you can probably cut him.
All right, give me a name.
What are your thoughts on Jerome Ford?
I mean, Uncle Jerome, he restructured his contract. He's there for one more year, but anything beyond this year, it's not good. I would just wait to see what the running back workload is going to be with Judkins. I feel like Sampson's going to end up being third and maybe brought on later. So I think he's a stash for now.
Okay, I like it. What about Isaiah Davis with the Jets?
I feel like you could.
They've been talking about a committee all offseason, Kyle.
He's not somebody I feel like I have to hold on to.
No, you can probably cut him, but see what happens in training camp.
All right, Elijah Mitchell.
I would stash to see. We don't know who the running back is in Kansas City. I think it's Pacheco, but I would honestly stash any Kansas City running back.
All right, the phrase that I've given Betz is I think their running back that will either score the most fantasy points or in the season score as their starter is not on the team yet. That's my
Interesting.
That's my little guess. Jonathan Brooks.
This is so sad, man. If you have a shallow league, I think you can cut him.
That is so sad, man.
But if you have an IR spot, just put him on IR, obviously.
Okay. Audric Estime.
You
hate him.
He's not that good. I think you can cut him.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fine if you need to create space. All right, move to wide receivers. Give me some names.
We talked about Corley and Polk. We think they're both cuttable. Gabe Davis. The unemployed Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I mean, for now, I think you could drop him, and if somebody wants to spend some waiver wire fab, but also, if you like him just for the vibes, I'm cool with keeping Gabe Davis.
All right, fine. What about Kevontae Turpin for the Cowboys?
Ooh, he did sign the richest special teams contract in the history of the NFL. And who's their wide receiver 3?
It's probably him.
Well, for the slot position, it's going to be Tolbert or him, but Tolbert didn't play there a ton last year.
Right.
So, I don't know. Turpin's somebody that I'm willing to hold on to. I mean, obviously, if you get special teams bonuses in your league, hold on to him there. He is older. He's like 30 years old. You wouldn't think he's really shifty. Yeah.
Wow.
Juju.
You can cut him.
Why?
What do you mean, why? Look at the depth chart, Kyle. Come on.
What if I took Juju in a startup in like 2017? Can I cut him then?
What's hilarious about Juju is like there's definitely going to be a week or two randomly in like the DFS season where it's like he's the min price, X wide receiver is out, like he's running so many routes. Like he'll be part of the committee, but you're never ever going to feel confident putting him in your lineup. And also he's not that good.
That was week 7 last year, by the way.
Hilarious.
That was exactly what it was. MVS.
I think you can keep him. And I think that, I think you will have the downfield shot role in this offense. Familiar with Kubiak from last year with the Saints. How often are you going to feel confident starting him? Probably never. But I was
going to say, are you ever going to
He's honestly just a roster clogger, but I see him having a role. Torrey Horton is a guy that's interesting in that same role. Like maybe Horton is the guy next year in that down the field role, but I don't know. If you're desperate and you play in a 14-man league or 16-man league, sure, you can roster him.
Horton's going to get a nickname on the show. I can guarantee you that. Is it Tim Hortons? Is it Horton Hears a Who? Is it Tony Horton? It's going to be all of those mixed in.
I love it.
Yeah. Van Jefferson, your guy, your dude,
nope.
Van Jefferson.
Cut him immediately.
I feel like your answer is probably something like, I would never have that guy on my team.
Not a chance.
Van Jefferson was taken in the second round by Sean McVay, and it was quite a reach when you look at Consensus Sports. Sean McVay is amazing. I've talked about him earlier. It's just I'm a big fan. As a drafter, if you really go back, you think of all the hits that they've had of Puka and Kyron and Cup. There's so much that just was bad. Like a lot of bad early draft capital picks. Gerald Everett, one of them too. But yeah, Van Jefferson should not be on a roster, in my opinion. Mason Tipton of the Saints.
No, you can cut that guy.
Rondale Moore, who is now a Viking.
That it's important to clarify because people probably don't even know that. No, you can cut him.
He's interesting to me. He's only 25 years old because this is the second week in a row I'm bringing him up. That's why he's interesting. And they didn't really have a slot guy. Like it was Naylor, but he was only 48% of the time in the slot. Brandon Powell's worthless. I think I'll leave the light on, but
Dude, he's done nothing in his career. And now coming off ACL.
Most people haven't. All right, Ray McLeod.
I mean, in theory, he's the slot wide receiver. and like he was usable last year in the double flex type stuff. You can probably roster him, but I would not feel good about that.
Antonio Gibson as a running back.
You can cut him.
That sucks, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other names you want to throw out there?
What about? I mean, you talked about Gadsden for the Chargers. What about Big Montana?
No, not for the vibes. I can't.
Do you have any read on that tight end room at all?
With Conklin?
Yeah, Conklin, Disley, and then the rookie.
They've actually, so Disley's like fun for the show, but they've kind of rotated. Like Stone Smart had a moment, Parham had a moment. They've kind of been fine having a rotation post Hunter Henry. I wonder if they're just going to approach it that way, and they just funnel targets to other places. But yeah, Will Disley's fun, man. He's a fun guy. Conklin's somebody I wouldn't mind having at the end of a bench. You're looking at my Dynasty roster right now, and there's a reason I have Will Disley because my team is so bad.
I did see in Dino Jr. you picked up Gadsden, so I mean you're making moves.
Dude, I've got Gadsden, I've got Chisholm. We don't even have a taxi squad, so that's basically what my roster is. Just a bunch of rebuilding dudes.
Do you have your first for next year?
Yeah, I have multiple firsts.
All right, you got the 101.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. All right, we have some good shows coming up over the summer. We're going to be talking Dynasty tiers. So if there's certain players you want to talk about, make sure you bring them up in our Dynasty channels, part of ballardiscord.com. Betz, tell everyone goodbye.
Yes, sadly, corporate couldn't make an appearance today. They're just out busy doing things. But Kyle and I got you guys. We'll be back next week with one of Jason or Mike. We'll see you then. Have a good weekend.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your Dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.